guess it's time to call our speaker then. Anu, thank you. Please come over and take over. So he's going to talk about application modernization on GCP and how it ties up with cloud modernization. Stage is all yours.
Thanks for your time tonight. I hope you have had a very good bite of your pizza and not feeling hungry anymore, so that you don't get distracted when you talk about some of the interesting things that we can do around application modernization on Google Cloud. You might have heard about this word around application modernization, digital modernization, or serverless features these days. These are the buzzwords. But what exactly is application modernization? All the companies, all the businesses you talk to, they are looking at leveraging the power of public cloud to implement their applications cost effectively, efficiently, do a faster rollout. But what exactly is the modernization? What exactly is application modernization? What exactly is infrastructure modernization? That's what we're going to discuss about tonight. Is it connected? I'll probably just use the slides here. So the key takeaways from this session, I'm hoping I'll be able to give you a clear picture of what application modernization is and how application modernization is not just a migration to the cloud, how it differs from infrastructure modernization and data modernization. So that will be my aim, and I hope we can get the clear distinction between the three modernization and how they tie together to form a digital modernization for any business these days. Little bit about me. So my name is Anu. I'm a principal consultant. I come from a storage and virtualization background. I started my career with the likes of EMC back in days when EMC was still a thing. Now they are Dell EMC. I've worked on virtualization solutions around VMware, Hyper-V. But over the last 8 years or so, I've been primarily focusing on public cloud. And for the last 5 years, I've been primarily focusing on GCP, Google Cloud Platform, as my core expertise. I believe in sharing the knowledge, sharing the experience to help others learn new technologies, what's going on in the industry, share our experience, and also learn from others. So I am a frequent blogger. I write blogs. I also help mentor other people, get them learn cloud technologies, specifically Google Cloud. So I'm certified in most of the professional level certifications for Azure, AWS. I'm also Kubernetes certified, and I've got 7 out of 11 Google Cloud certifications. And I'm also a Google Cloud authorized trainer. Enough about me. So modernization as a vision. So as I touched upon, if you talk about the modernization to any client, so the first thing that they speak about is the increase, the agility and the speed that they want their applications to be deployed at, right? They want the applications to be highly efficient. They want to minimize the cost. They want a very good security posture for their applications. And more often than not, the understanding is if we move the workload, if we move the applications to the cloud, everything will come out of the box. But I think being in the industry for so long and having experienced so many incidents when we hear about the data breach or any security breach that happens for the different businesses that are in the cloud, you can understand that it's not about moving your application or moving your workloads to the cloud. It's about how you move it and what are the measures you are looking at when you are moving to the cloud. So before we get into the details of what exactly is modernization, what exactly is application modernization, can I ask who can explain or who can just tell me what modernization is? What do you think is application modernization or digital modernization? Forget about application modernization. Yes, please.
I think digital modernization is about moving away from infrastructure that server infrastructure. But in terms of application modernization, to me, I think I have no idea, but it's more like moving on to as a service model, which what I've seen many customers do.
Good that you touched upon the servers and the infrastructure. You said you are from Dell, right?
Yeah.
I understand that. Dell is primarily into the hardware, so that's one of the key things, right? So depending on who you are talking to, who is the vendor who you are speaking with, the definition or how they present the application modernization, it completely differs. Anyone else? Anyone else want to have a go?
I think modernization is just changing your current tech debt to a future tech debt.
That's an interesting way of saying it. Anyone else? Okay. So I think it's a process of harnessing the true capabilities of the emerging technologies or the modern technologies to do your business in a better way, right? So it can be, and that's why I was talking about the 3 segments of digital modernization. So when we talk about infrastructure modernization, it's about how better you can manage your infrastructure rather than managing a box of steel sitting somewhere, eating up power supply, generating heat. How you manage your applications, just thinking about the core operating system that's running it. When we talk about the data modernization, rather than you having to run an instance of Oracle database or any relational database running on a server, on a VM, you have to manage all that stuff yourself. How you can pass on that underlying management of the database to someone who can manage it at scale. That's like leveraging the power of the public cloud. There are so many services available these days. We'll talk about these in detail in the coming slides, but think about the cloud functions. Think about pub subs, right? So publication and subscription, which is basically event-driven subscriber and publisher service that gives you that functionality of doing or triggering something for you, doing a job for you as soon as an event happens. You just focus on controlling those aspects. So that's the modernization, rather than you having to run cron jobs every night and, for example, running a report, right? So we'll try to break it down into 3 categories, as I said, and those categories are infrastructure modernization, data modernization, and application modernization. So when I say infrastructure modernization, that's, I think, the foundation of any transformation, foundation of any digital transformation. So when you're looking at making use of high-end computing, making use of high-end servers, storage, memory, when you are moving away from on-premises data centers, that's pretty much the infrastructure modernization, right? Data. Data is, I think, the core of any business. But how you utilize it is where the value lies for that particular business. So unlocking the value of data through cloud-based services is something that gives you that power and that capability of utilizing the modern age data modernization. GCP provides some really powerful services and solutions around data warehousing, data lake, even the visualization of the data. We'll talk about some of the services around data visualization, right? So things like BigQuery. It is a very powerful tool that gives you the capability of storing the data at the same time in the same old way where you used to run the queries to get the value or get the output from your data that's stored in a relational database somewhere. Using tools like BigQuery, you're able to utilize the cloud-native services, don't have to make use of any third-party services. You can make the use of the cloud storage in the background. However, at the same time, you run the analytics queries from the same platform. From an application modernization perspective, updating the application architecture or the design, how your application is designed, is really the core of application modernization. It can be moving your application from a traditional on-premises tech stack and moving it into the cloud, or breaking your application down into from a monolithic pattern to microservices pattern. So if we look at some core examples, if we look at the example of Netflix, how they run their whole application, it sounds like they just have a bunch of movies stored somewhere, right? And they just play it. But it's not that simple. All the cool things that they do in the background, it's because they have broken their whole process, their logic down into microservices, which is they have different services that handles the payment. They have different services that handle the interest of a particular user based on what movies they have watched previously. They have separate set of services that handle the processing and encoding or decoding of the movies. They have completely different services that actually make sure that the clips of a particular movie that you are watching at a particular time is stored somewhere closer to your location. Now think about a scenario when there was no cloud and Netflix had to store all this data, all the movies in a server somewhere in a database, in a data center. And you are sitting, for example, here, but the data center is somewhere in the United States. How long it will take for the movie to be fetched, to stream to you? So this is the real power, or this is how they have really leveraged the capability and the power of public cloud by utilizing the services that are available to them in a best possible way. Does anyone have any questions so far? Well, if you ask me how they come to know that this particular guy or someone who is browsing the movies is, or maybe interested in watching a particular movie, there are so many data scientists or data engineers in the room, they should be able to tell how the algorithm runs based on which, using the binaries, they tag the movie interest based on what you have watched previously. And they run that machine learning algorithm in the background based on which they just assign the tags to a particular title and the movie clips. Coming back to the modernization. From an infrastructure modernization perspective, so these are the high-level categories on which you can look at the infrastructure modernization. One is virtualization and containerization. So when you have an application or a code running a standalone host or a server on-prem, and you virtualize it, you move it to things like VMware or Hyper-V for that matter. That's virtualization. That's making the use of your resources, optimizing the resources to the best possible way, in the best possible way. The next level is containerization, right? So when you move the applications from your virtual machines or your infrastructure in on-premises or data center, that's the infrastructure modernization. Similarly, infrastructure as a code. So what it gives you is the scalability and the speed to deploy your application and your infrastructure. So you are not really just installing the operating system on your hardwares. You're not connecting the power supplies to your hardwares, or you are not connecting the network cables to your switches and the hardwares. You're just making use of the application. You have the image ready for your code, for your application, and you just deploy it. That's infrastructure modernization. Serverless computing. Likewise, network modernization, making use of CDN. So the software-defined networks that are available. You don't really have to have a router or a switch or a firewall on-premises, configure the VLANs and all that stuff manually yourself. All you do is define how the load balancing should work in your environment. And everything is being taken care of in the background by the software that's running. That's infrastructure modernization. Data modernization. Can anyone have a go what data modernization is? So basically, data modernization is, for example, data warehousing, right? So migrating to solutions like BigQuery. So rather than having your servers dedicated to the data warehouse where you are connecting your data warehouse servers to the file storages or even for data lakes, right? So rather than managing it yourself, if you are using the services like cloud storage, BigQuery on cloud, that's data modernization. What data modernization helps you do is it helps you harness AI services like AutoML or BigQuery ML. So these are the services that integrate so seamlessly with your storage in the cloud, be it cloud storage, be it BigQuery. As I was saying, BigQuery, underneath the covers, it uses cloud storage to store the data. The beauty is you are getting that capability of running your analytics query in BigQuery, but you are also making the use of the cost or the benefits that cloud storage gives. So if you are not accessing your data for, say, 30 days, it automatically charges you based on the cloud storage prices. So you don't really have to do anything yourself. It all happens automatically by itself. And at the same time, you have the capability of running the queries anytime, just like you will run SQL queries on your database. This is an interesting topic. Application modernization. As I was saying, so depending on which vendor or who you are speaking with, there are few vendors who even call lift and shift or moving from on-premises to cloud as application modernization. To be really honest, I think that's not really an application modernization. That's just the first step towards application modernization. That's just a part of infrastructure modernization. Application modernization is really when you are touching the architecture of your application. When you are, for example, adopting the patterns like microservices architecture. This is just an example here that I've used for a hexagonal design that I'm not a developer myself, so I just know the concept. So hexagonal design is something that's widely used when you design microservices. I think it's data-driven design or I think it's domain-driven design is what they call as. So most of the services are developed based on, yes, domain-driven design. That's where I am. So the main thing is decouple your application from technology as much as you could. Right? If you have your application developed in such a way that no matter whether it's running on premises or in Azure or AWS, it is easy enough to migrate to GCP. The GCP is the target. Isolate your business logic from technology. So if your application is not tied very closely with the technology that it is running on, it's not really the application modernization that you are making use of. How many of you have heard of the six R's? No one? Well, that's interesting. Out of, hope at least half of you might have heard of the 6 R's. So whenever there is a discussion around migration to the cloud, AWS uses these terms quite often. So I'll go one by one. So these are the 6 R's that you consider whenever you are looking at the feasibility of moving your workload, or when you are looking at your workload and analyzing how feasible it is to modernize or move to any platform. So the first two are not even part of any migration or any modernization. So that pretty much just means retire and retain. So retire is when you look at an application and you see, oh, this application is no longer needed. So there is no value, or it's not even worth looking at this application and moving it to another platform or to cloud, right? So it's old enough. We don't need this application anymore. We just retire. We just kill this application. Retain is when an application has been written in such a way that it's so tightly integrated with the platform that it is running on. It's almost impossible to move it. I say impossible because the effort and time you put in analyzing that application and coming up with a plan to move it to the cloud is probably way more expensive than letting it run where it is at the moment. So we just leave that application as is. We don't touch it. Rehost, that's pretty much the very first step towards cloud migration or modernization, so to say. What rehost means is you don't touch the application architecture. You don't touch application as such. What you do is just move the application from the existing infrastructure, existing platform, move it to cloud, move it to its new platform. The best example would be if you have VMware stack running in a data center, and if you are looking at moving the VMs onto cloud, what you do is, and that's the reason why, I mean, in that regards, I should say that VMware, they have been really very smart in terms of rather than competing with the public cloud providers, they sort of partner with them. Now, almost all the cloud providers, they have VMware as a service. So for GCP, they have GCP, which is Google Cloud VMware Engine. What it does, rather than running VMware in your environment, you just run VMware in the cloud provider's environment, in Google's environment, and it is just moving the machine seamlessly. You just don't do anything. It's just like moving from one server to another server. Re-platform is when you do a little bit of tweaking. You are still not touching the application infrastructure. So the example would be if you have a relational database running on premises, say you have MySQL database running on a server in your infrastructure. You run that MySQL instance in cloud now. So for example, MySQL. So you are not touching the application or the server architecture as such. You're just moving it to a different platform with a little bit of tweaking. Although, again, arguably, I say that's not modernization, but still quite a lot of vendors, they call re-platforming as modernization. Because rather than having to run an instance yourself of, for example, as I said, relational database, you are now using a managed instance of that relational database on cloud platform. Repurchase. Repurchase is when it's sort of tied to retire, but it's not really like you are retiring the application. What you are retiring is you are retiring the underlying infrastructure or the platform that it is running on, but you are moving the application. So the perfect example would be moving from Exchange or the on-premises emails to Office 365. That's like repurchase. So you still have all your emails, everything intact, but rather than having your own Active Directory and the Exchange server running on-premises, you have just moved everything onto Office 365. So that's software as a service. So anything that is being managed by the vendor, you just care about managing the licenses. That's like repurchasing. The last bit, refactoring and re-architecting. That's the main bit that we are talking about today here as application modernization. From an application modernization perspective, you are actually working with the application architecture. You are making the changes to the application itself. You are almost rewriting the whole application and you are moving it to different components. That's where the true capability of public cloud comes in. So rather than having an application running on a particular server, if I go back to the Netflix example that I mentioned about. So think about Netflix having all their application logic running in a data center on one particular machine, and having to provide movies and the suggestions to different users from different geographies, and they have to, let's just say, update their payment processing system. So what they will have to do, they'll take the downtime for the whole application, right? So they can't really do anything without just putting this particular server in a maintenance mode, like how we used to do it back in days when the core banking systems were running in a data center. We used to get a notification every now and then. Our application will be down for so many hours because of the maintenance that we are going through. Now what happens? Because these components are so distributed, and they are being taken care of one particular service for one functionality. So let's say if this is the guy who is taking care of the payment, and I have to do maintenance on this, there's no impact at all on any of the other services that are running. So that's where the true application modernization, the power of real application modernization comes into the play. When we are rewriting the application, taking the core capability and the full functionality of the cloud services that they can provide, and how they interact, or how they make the services of that particular application interact with each other. Just to give you a sort of idea how the modernization of your application on Google Cloud Platform would look like. So again, there are so many services that can handle so many functions. It's up to the business and the person who is designing the infrastructure, or I should say, designing the platform, to decide what service provides me the best capability to do this particular function. But these are just the examples that I've taken. So on the very far left, so this is the front-end services. So when I say front-end services, so these are the services that any user will interact with. So they are, rather than having to supply them the IP address or the name of the server where the actual application is running, you can make use of the load balancers or the things like API platforms where you are making use of programmatic functionality rather than having a user to do something for you. These days we talk about automation a lot, where we design a code and that code triggers something that talks to another application. How does that interaction happen? That all happens via APIs, right? Then down below is DevOps CI/CD services. So things like Cloud Build, Artifact Registry, or infrastructure as a code from Terraform, HashiCorp Terraform. We also have other services like HashiCorp Packer, where you can have your images pre-built and being stored in Artifact Registry. So think about it like, rather than having to build your machine every time, or I'm pretty sure, I'm not sure about the students here, but back in days when we were using Windows laptops a lot, there were so many instances when we had to reboot or rebuild the whole machine, reinstall the complete operating system on it, right? So that was very time consuming. Now we have tools like Homebrew. We have Chocolatey for Windows, wherein you just define your script, right? And all you have to do is, once the Windows machine has been installed, you run that script. And all your softwares, all your applications are installed just like that, without you having to spend hours installing the application. So that's where the whole DevOps or the CI/CD process comes into the picture, when you have your images pre-built using Packer, being stored, they are being stored in Artifact Registry. You don't really have to look for the image. You have all the code pre-built in Terraform. Terraform goes to Artifact Registry. It checks the relevant image, whatever has been defined. It takes the image, There are still a few services missing from this, but things like binary authorization. So it's like a digital signature that you can supply, and without that image being digitally signed, it cannot be deployed to your infrastructure. So that gives you that sort of security that we were talking about. From a compute services perspective, we have Cloud Run, Cloud Functions, Google Kubernetes Engine. Again, they do the same thing. I was talking to someone just before the session when we were talking about the capabilities and the services that one platform provides and what are the benefits over the other platforms that provides pretty much the same thing. So the services are there. It just depends on your use case. If you don't care about the infrastructure, if you don't really want to manage your infrastructure, you don't care how the networking is done, all you want is, this is my application, I've defined it in a well-mannered way in this particular image. All I want is this application to run, use Cloud Run. But if you have very high security standards, if you want your network to be configured in a particular way, Google Kubernetes Engine provides you that capability of managing that infrastructure, underlying infrastructure, not as in the hardware infrastructure, but basically the networking and the operating systems and what kind of images that you deploy. From a data perspective, again, we have so many options here, but just to name a few, Cloud SQL is something similar to your relational database, the traditional relational database. Firestore is a document database, which is more relevant when you are talking about the mobile applications. Memory store, we were talking about the things like CDN, right? So if you don't want your data to be stored for long, if you just want speed and your data is being used for caching purposes, this is where memory store comes into the picture. And then from an observability and analytics perspective, so we have inbuilt features that is provided out of the box by Cloud Operations Suite for logging and monitoring. We have BigQuery. Again, along with the storage, it gives you the capability of doing the analytics, doing the, there are things like AutoML, BigQuery ML. You can integrate it with machine learning models, do all the processing and analytics at the same time by using the cloud native storage, which is cloud storage under the hood. I know a lot of jargon there, a lot of services there, but this is just a very high level overview of what sort of modernized application would look like in Google Cloud Platform. Now, we talked about application modernization, we talked about digital modernization, and we talked about data modernization. One thing I wanted to call out here, as I mentioned at the beginning of this session, application modernization is not really a cloud migration. Application modernization is not moving to the cloud. How and why? If you think about compelling moment or trigger, can you think of a moment when a business would think of moving away from data center onto the cloud? It's probably when they are coming towards the end of their lease for the data center, when they are not willing to pay a hefty fee or lease amount to the data center company for their infrastructure, right? So that's when they'll think about, oh, let's move to the cloud. Yes.
But isn't there like a fee to, I mean, you're paying for the cloud as well. So when a customer is trying to move away from a data center to a cloud, they have to think about the cost of cloud as well. So it's not just, modernizing is not just about moving away from data center.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Moving away is not just about, or modernization is not just about moving away from the data center. That is the first step. That is needed, but that's not the modernization. And that's why I'm saying cloud migration is different from application modernization. Mainly the businesses, and that's the value proposition of public cloud that we have to educate our customers to, right? So not just by moving to the cloud, you'll have highly efficient applications running in cloud. You'll not have very less bill at the end of the month. You'll still pay if you don't use the services well. It's not like, say, in the data center, you'll have to sort of lease a cage, right? Or I forgot the term that they used to say. I think it's cage or something. Bay or racks, yes. And then they'll have the full stack of the servers and the switches and all that stuff. If you don't buy that, you're just pretty much like paying for it, for the whole hardware. Whereas, if you're moving to the cloud, that's the first step towards modernization. Because if you are making the good use of so from an infrastructure modernization perspective, there are quite a few best practices and there are quite a few recommendations that when you move to the cloud are being advised to you. Someone who is doing the modernization work or someone who is designing the architecture for what the platform would look like, how they design it is very critical in that factor. Say, what kind of machines do you choose? How often you run those machines? Is it really necessary to run my application on the machines? Or can I just create a cloud function for it? Can I just trigger that particular algorithm or that particular command when it is needed? Or do I need the machine to be running 24 hours to just run that command once in a day or a few times in a day, right? So that's the compelling factor. More often than not, when people are thinking of moving away from data center, they'll think of cloud migration. The focus. Focus on, when we talk about the focus, modernization enhances application architecture, while the cloud migration, it primarily involves moving to the cloud. It doesn't really enhance the architecture of your application. It doesn't give you the value, the main value of moving to the cloud. Scope. From a scope perspective, modernization encompasses infrastructure, data, and application, as we just discussed in the previous few slides. Whereas the cloud migration specifically focuses on the infrastructure components. It doesn't really touch your application. Conclusion. Where we all started. Application modernization is not just the migration to the cloud. App mod with infra mod, with data mod is the complete digital modernization. And that's where you get the complete value or the best value out of your buck. When you modernize your complete application, the stack, that's where you get the real value of the modernization or the business value of your modernization. In the quest to harness the public cloud, application modernization is the critical strategy. It involves infrastructure modernization. You can't really have application modernization, or you can't really perform application modernization without doing infrastructure modernization or data modernization, but that is not really the thing that's going to give you the core capabilities or the power of public cloud. With that, I end it here. Open for questions if anyone has any questions. Yes.
Just wondering how business can be easy provisioning if they are in a public cloud space.
So can you repeat?
Like how easy they can provisioning in a public cloud space. For example, they pay the service as per user already, right? How easy like they can be provisioned. For example, the market performance is not well, and then their cash flow is maybe not strong, and they pay the service like a huge capital in front already. So what they do in the long term, I just want to know.
So from experience, because I've worked with so many clients and have done so many migrations and modernizations, if you architect it well enough that the resources are optimally utilized, which is again the benefit that you get out of the public cloud, by having your applications in the public cloud, you can be sure to have a bill which is way less cheaper than what you will otherwise have by running your applications on-prem or a server. So in terms of provisioning, as we were talking about the CI/CD or the DevOps practices, once you have the blueprints ready, once you have your applications automated, it is a matter of just repeating that process which has already been tested previously. So you are not spending your time and effort in terms of developing that process of provisioning. You already have that process. You are just moving that. You are just basically running that process of provisioning. It is long term. It is long term. And that is the main reason why I was emphasizing on the difference between application modernization and migration to the cloud. So it shouldn't be just seen as moving to the cloud will solve the problem for you. Moving your VMs that is running on a VMware stack in your data center on premises, and if you just move it to something like GCP, it's not going to solve your problem. You might end up paying way more than what you are already paying on premises because you're not really utilizing or leveraging the power of cloud. However, it gives you the first step. It is the first step for you in the journey of your modernization. So it might take time. It gives you the capability. It enables you to do that modernization. It helps you to move your applications from the virtual machine that is running on Google Cloud onto the cloud native services like PubSub, like Cloud Functions or Cloud Run. We have seen customers, we have seen people who actually started by migrating their application from a bare metal server on premises onto things like Compute Engine. And then very quickly, they started talking about how we can modernize it. And then they started leveraging things like PubSub, Cloud Functions, and Cloud Run. So that's the real power, or that's the real value where the business can get if you use the cloud native services in the best possible way. Again, I think we touched upon the use cases for Cloud Run, Cloud Function, Google Kubernetes Engine. All the three services, they pretty much do the same thing. But it's up to you how you design or architect your services and make a call whether this particular service is best suited for Kubernetes Engine or a Cloud Run. Or do you even need a Cloud Run? Can I just write it in a Cloud Function? Yep.
Hi, Anu. I'm not techie like all of you, but I think I try my level best to get the hang of it. So I just wanted to understand that from your perspective, that since you're being involved a lot of time into the migration, regardless an application or any sort of migration, like what's the most common objection you generally face when it comes to sitting in meetings with client or with your internal and external team members that you guys are working maybe on an RFQ, or maybe you guys are working on already an existing project, and like a lot of bottlenecks are coming from time to time. So what, in your perspective, like what's the most common objection you see with your internal teams? Like we don't think that this is feasible. It's going to take N number of days to deploy X thing or Y thing. I do not know. I hope I am able to put across my point, what I'm trying to ask.
Well, fantastically put forward. I think you deserve a clap for that. Although you are not technical, but I think you have that business knowledge. You have that understanding of the core business knowledge. So that's a very interesting question. So to your point, what are the main challenges that we face when we talk to the client? More often than not, we are told that this is what we need, rather than asking us that this is the problem we are facing, how we can solve it. When you start talking to the client, you will be told, this is my application, and we need a Google Kubernetes engine deployed in our cloud. Can you migrate it? Rather than, so I think the challenge is to first understand the problem, to first understand the trigger that we were talking about in one of the slides, right? So what is the trigger? What is the compelling moment? Why are they thinking about moving to the cloud? Is it just that they have heard of some cool things on cloud? Or are they just looking at moving away from the data center? So I think that's the biggest challenge, understanding their requirement, really understanding, okay, so he's asking me to architect a solution on Google Kubernetes Engine, deploy a Google Kubernetes Engine. Do they really need it? Do they really have the skill and the team who can manage the whole infrastructure for them, or the whole complexity that Kubernetes Engine brings with it, right? So then the next challenge is, first to understand that, then the next challenge is how you start that conversation with the client. You obviously don't want to be seen as being pushy or they're completely deviating from the core requirements. Because if you start talking about serverless architecture all of a sudden, when they had this whole Kubernetes engine in their mind, they might think, oh, he's just trying to sell his own solution or his own like services or things like that. So how you articulate their business problems, the technical challenges that they are facing, and help them guide that this is how you can solve your problems. This is how you can solve your challenges that you are currently facing. And we think that if you choose this service or if you go down this path, you might not probably be able to go where you want to go, or you will not be able to get the most out of your investment in terms of time and money. So again, yeah, it's a journey. We have to sometimes take them on a journey, run a few workshops, guide them why the solution or why what we are talking about makes more sense for them in future. They might think that it's probably not worth immediately. Yeah, fair enough. But you have to show them that picture from a future perspective. What are the business values that you get? Yeah. Sometimes you have to do a lot of spreadsheets, run the calculations, do the numbers that this is what it is costing you now. This is what it will cost you when you move to this thing, and look at the 5 years from now numbers, and then they can realize.
Hi. Thank you for the talk. It was quite like a broad overview of the cloud adoption. I just had a quick one. Like you said, you're a cloud trainer. Do you have like online courses, or is it more in-person courses? Yeah.
So Google Authorized Trainer is more of like instructor-led trainings. So I do that, but very soon I'm going to have my online courses as well. But that has nothing to do with the Google Authorized Trainer. So I'm working on a few courses, online courses. The first one is Google Kubernetes Engine, although I don't prefer running your applications on Google Kubernetes Engine. If you can avoid that, avoid it. Use Google Cloud Run. But yeah, Authorized Trainer is more for in-person instructor-led trainings.
All right, thank you.
Hi, I think you've just answered my question, but I will try to make a double click. I'm not a tech. I'm a product manager. So migration to the cloud or application migration would be like something that an IT manager brings to the table, and maybe has to convince me and then go to the stakeholder. So how we as a team, as a squad team to the board, can convince our stakeholder that not only the migration to the cloud will get down in the costs, get better costs, but in those 5 years you've just mentioned, which is the difference in that from the beginning in the migration to the cloud, in percentage, from your experience and from your clients, how better is those 5 long years versus that first step? Did I make my point?
I'll try and see if I understood your question correctly. So you're asking, how we convince someone to basically start that journey, and how
not to stay in the first step.
Yeah, for the first step. I think I'll be quite honest. Sometimes, no matter what you do, no matter how efficiently you build your proposal, no matter how good your solution looks like, it sometimes depends on the situation as well, right? So think about the COVID days. When the COVID hit, everyone was so skeptical, everyone was so scared, and almost all the projects were put on hold. But all of a sudden, I don't know what happened, but because of this paradigm change, right? Everyone was looking for ways how they can efficiently improve their ways of working remotely. And that completely changed the dynamics. There were so many people looking at automating their whole business, how they do the business. And that sort of kick-started this whole modernization journey. And when they see the value, okay, so previously, so there are so many things. It's not just like the application. You would see things like CCAI, which is contact center AI. So for the telcos, or where you have call centers. Usually, someone will give them a call, and they'll note down the whatever they understood as a problem, the summary of the problem and the resolution, right? So it takes a fair bit of time from an agent perspective. If we can implement the AI in contact center using things like CCAI, which is Google's service, it can reduce that 20 minutes time drastically, and it can bring that down to something like 2 minutes or 3 minutes. So that's the value. Sometimes you have to show them the value using a POC, or giving them the examples from other customers, or showing them the case studies. But I think more often than not, it's the numbers that plays a big role. So again, depending on who you are talking to, you have to change the conversation, or mold your conversation accordingly. But from experience, yeah, mostly it's the numbers. And that's why we see a lot of the time engineers ending up in a situation where something was committed, and then because of the numbers, that can't be delivered. So then you either compromise on the solution that is being delivered, or you end up doing it for free. So that's the main thing. I mean, understanding the business problem, making sure that you align it with the customer's requirement, and making sure that what we are proposing is something that makes sense to their business. Yes.
Just due to the interest in time, these have been some amazing questions, but we'll probably take 3 more questions, if that's okay. So does anyone have any?
What steps do you take to ensure security when modernizing your application for the cloud?
That's a great question. That depends on what are the aspects you are considering when you are modernizing your application. That also depends on how many components are involved in your application. That also depends how, or what is the kind of pattern that you are adopting for your application, right? So on a very high level, if I refer back to the reference slide that I had shown, from a front-end perspective, you never want to give the end user direct access to the server where your application is running, both from a security perspective as well as from a scalability and reliability perspective. You use things like APIs, right, so that they can access your application programmatically. Even if it is not API, you use things like Cloud Armor and Cloud Load Balancing, so that you are not exposing your application directly outside your environment to the outside world. You have the load balancer, and there are so many ways you can configure the load balancer using HTTP, HTTPS, and then you can have things like Cloud Armor, which works both like a web application firewall as well as a security guard in front of your Cloud Armor to avoid incidents of things like DDoS attack. From a back-end services perspective, because your front end or your application logic needs to talk to the data, there are a number of recommended practices that you should be adopting in terms of how you create the service account. You never give a user account access to the application or the data directly. You always use the service account, which indirectly works on behalf of the application and does the job for you, updates the database or accesses the database. You follow the principle of least privileges. I still remember the days when you are working on a Linux machine or any machine and you want the God mode. You want the administrator rights on everything, even if you are just probably generating a report, right? So rather than giving the users direct access to those services or those services or the server, you have the roles created and you assign the roles to the groups that that particular user is part of. From a DevOps perspective, from an automated CI/CD perspective, you have vulnerability scanning in place that scans your images automatically and checks if there is any issues or any version that image is on which is out to date and it needs to be updated. We talked about binary authorization, which makes sure that until that particular image is digitally signed, it cannot be deployed to a particular environment. So there are a number of ways that you can, again, depending on, obviously, binary authorization would be irrelevant if you're thinking of cloud functions, because you are just writing the function and it gets triggered by an event. You're not using the image to deploy onto a container. But if you're thinking of Cloud Run or Kubernetes engine, for that matter, then yes. Does that?
In general, security is a big area.
100%.
Security modernization on the left-hand side of your equation.
100%. Yeah.
So I guess you'll be updating us.
I think you modernize your application or not, you modernize your infrastructure or not, you modernize your data or not, security is paramount. Security is always there to be considered as the first thing. How you manage your data, application, or your infrastructure. It becomes more critical when you talk about public cloud, because now it is outside your private world. So even in the data centers, the area or the risk factor is low because it is sitting in a private data center, but even then the incidents happen. When you don't have the proper measures applied to the application or your infrastructure, things like losing the cable, losing the connectivity, losing the power, they happen quite a lot.
So in your experience, are you happy with the security strength in the applications that you see that are migrated to the cloud?
That's a very vague question. I think
In general?
you're talking about the cloud platform as such?
No, every level of the stack.
Yeah, I think that depends on the security measures or how you design your security. So I think it is more relevant to the person or to the team who is designing it. But from a cloud platform perspective, if it is done right, if you are choosing the right services, then yes, it is secured.
Sorry to interject. Probably this deserves a one-to-one conversation after
Yes.
this, and that might be a bit more helpful. The other question.
Okay. So we talked about the infrastructure modernization, right? So I have one question. So how you make a judgment, like whether to use a serverless or whether to use the container?
Great question. Again, I think so there are a few factors, right? One is customers' zeal to adopt to the new technologies and the services. Also, whether what you're proposing to the customer, does it make sense to them? So I'll just give you a very basic example. So let me take an example of, say, Gumtree, okay? Just hypothetical. Gumtree is giving you a platform where you can advertise your stuff to sell or interact with other people. The chances are they would probably not have an IT team in-house who can manage the whole infrastructure or the environment for them. So they'll probably not have a separate security team. They'll probably not have a separate networking team, a DevOps team, right? So if you talk to them, if you understand their basic need and requirement, what they want is a highly efficient way of giving a platform to the customer or to the end user where they can post their ads quickly and efficiently with minimal intervention from their own internal team. So I would probably, if I'm talking to them, understanding their requirement, I would probably not propose a Kubernetes engine to them. But on the other hand, if I'm talking to someone like, again, a hypothetical assumption, any of the big 4 banks, they are very big. Chances are they'll have a very huge infrastructure. They'll have a lot of teams in there, a dedicated team for security, for networking, and they'll also have different users internally who consume the infrastructure or the platform that they provide. If you talk to them that, okay, let's run Cloud Functions or Cloud Run, they are probably not going to be agreeing to that easily. Because they have the team, they have the skills. Having a Kubernetes platform running on Google Kubernetes engine makes sense to them. Does that answer your question?
This will probably be our last question.
Thank you. Hi, it was really a wonderful session. Thank you so much for that. My question is from a data engineering perspective. So if a company has a data lake in S3 and a data warehouse or has a SQL server hosted in AWS RDS for transformation and a warehouse, so how important is it for them to move towards the tool such as BigQuery or Databricks, and what's the benefit of moving to those applications in terms of engineering and architecture perspective?
That's a very good question. I think before answering that, or before I'm in a position to answer that, I would really try to understand what kind of data do you have in RDS? What is the kind of, when you talk about data lake, I would probably not think about RDS, right? So from my perspective, I would try to understand what is your
for data warehousing and transformation, basically, because for data lake, I think dumping it into the S3 would be more efficient than into the RDS directly. So data lake in S3 and maybe a data warehouse in RDS, that should be managed by the engineers itself. So maybe moving into the BigQuery might be easy option in terms of the human resource side. Probably, I'm not sure. That's a question for you. How important is it, and how efficient is it?
So maybe I'll try to answer your question using a reference architecture on Google Cloud Platform. So when you talk about a data platform, so there are different resources where the data is being generated that gets dumped into a cloud storage, which is equivalent of AWS S3. That's your data lake, where everything is being dumped. Now, obviously, you are storing the data to make use of it. You'll be running either some queries or you'll be processing that. Then there are extract, load, transformation kind of cycle that comes into the picture. So then on Google Cloud Platform, you'll have something like data flow. Is it data flow? Yes. I think yes. That will do the transformation, extract the data from cloud storage, does the transformation. Then there are orchestration systems like Cloud Composer or Dataproc to do that processing, running the jobs in data flow pipelines. Then after processing, it has to be stored somewhere. So it can be, again, cloud storage. But if you're storing it in cloud storage, what's the point? What are you going to do? You're probably going to be using that data for analytics purposes. So that's where the BigQuery comes into the picture. So the first stage is extracting the data from different sources, storing it into the cloud storage, extracting that data from cloud storage, doing the processing, storing it into BigQuery. Now, BigQuery has a structured data, and it also gives you an interface to run analytics on top of the data that has been stored in BigQuery. So it can, like the RDS you just mentioned, so it can store the data in structured way. It gives you the capability of running the SQL queries, generating views on the tables that are there. Now, from the process data, you might be looking at refining it further for, say, data scientists. So you might use the data from BigQuery, create another view or another table with customized view. And that customized view will be given access to the data scientists so that the data scientists or the end users, they don't access the raw data, which is in cloud storage, or the complete set of the table where you might have the PII for the customer or any sensitive information that you don't want the data scientists to take a look at. So from there, it gets transformed into another view, and only that view is given access to or the data scientists are given access to to that particular view. So this is just an example. There can be different personas. You might also have auditors from external agencies that are outside your organization. So I guess in summary, it depends on the use case. What are you trying to do with that data? That's when you think about which services make sense of storing the data in a particular format and how to store it.
Yep, I think due to the interest of time, we'll probably close Q&A session there. But if you do have more questions, feel free to stay behind, and I'm sure Anu will be more than happy to answer them. Just want to say thank you so much, Anu. Can we give one big round of applause to Anu, please?
Thank you, everyone. It has been a really great night, and you have been a great audience. Some really interesting questions. Thank you.